Welcome to the United States Helicopter Safety Team's presentation on energy and autorotations. This slide demonstrates the airflow during normal powered flight versus the airflow during autorotation. Using energy for our benefit. The secret to extracting the maximum flexibility of an autorotation is to understand the various energies we have at our disposal. Types of energy available. Energy is the ability to do work, and the energies that you have available to you in autorotation are potential, kinetic, and rotational. There is a subtle but powerful interplay between these energies that we can use to our benefit, but only if we know how and we understand them. The process of getting from the time and place of an engine failure to safely landing on the ground can be thought of as an exercise in energy management. That leaves us with three types of energy. We have potential energy, that's due to our height above a surface. We have kinetic energy, which is due to the motion or the motion of the helicopter with respect to a point on the ground. And then we have rotational energy, which is the energy of our rotating mass. Don't worry about the energies for any particular helicopter. It won't change. These energies cannot be created or destroyed, just transferred from one place to another. This is where you, the pilot, become the manager of these energies during your autorotation. There are many ways that these energies interrelate. Potential energy can be viewed as a source of kinetic and rotational energy. It's not easy to compare kinetic and potential energy because they can be traded for one another. But the relatively small size of the rotational energy is actually surprising. There was one DVD on this subject that actually showed the rotational energy was a very small fraction of the combined kinetic and potential energy, even at the start of a typical flare. What makes this relative size difference important is that the rotor RPM, while it's the smallest energy, is by far the most important energy. Because without the rotor RPM, it's not possible to control the helicopter. Let me say that again. Without the rotor RPM, it is not possible to control the helicopter. So all the other energies are of no use at all. We've identified three stages to the autorotation: the descent, the flare, and the landing. At each stage, energy is being converted from one type to another, until we've wisely used all of it up and we're sitting safely on the ground. This table describes the different sources and destinations for the energy in each phase of the autorotation. Since energy can neither be created nor destroyed, where did it all go? Well, into overcoming the drag of the rotor blades and the drag of the airframe during your descent. The reason for transfer of energy from one type to another is to get more kinetic energy by sacrificing height, so we better know what the various benefits and penalties are. Squaring a number means multiplying it by itself. Since the square term shows up in both the rotational and kinetic energy terms, it's important that we recognize this. This means that if you have a higher speed, you have a lot more energy. In the example, you can see by increasing our speed from 60 to 70 knots, we actually end up with 1,300 more units of energy to play with. Also, if we're slowing our airspeed from 60 to 50 knots, we have 900 less units of energy to play with. So you can see the effect can be quite dramatic for a 10-knot difference in normal speed. The energy concept will be used a lot when talking about autorotational performance. Potential energy. Take a helicopter in a variety of different heights and speeds and see how much energy it has. You will see what can be done with that energy to get different conditions at the flare. Ignore the possibility of trade-offs for now. If we just look at the height above the ground at the end of our descent and the start of flare, using speeds alone, the real picture becomes very clear. Remember in our example previously we had 60 and 70 knots. What's really interesting is the difference between those two speeds is almost 50%. Let's look at the difference in energy at 50 feet above the ground, the starting of our flare, with different speeds. The potential energy at 50 feet is 1,600 units. What's really interesting is how much difference in airspeed 10 knots from 60 knots makes in the overall energy situation. At 70 knots, the energy is 1,300 units greater than at 60 knots, but at 50 knots, it's 900 units less. The difference between the two is nearly 50%. Let's look at the end result. If we use 100 knots, say the maximum airspeed in autorotation, instead of 60 knots, the difference in energy at the start of the flare is 6,400 units greater. Now if we go 40 knots slower than 60, down to a low speed of 20 knots, we have 3,200 units less energy. We can do a whole lot with more energy, but there's not much we can do when we don't have enough. Understanding the types of energy that may be available to a pilot following an engine failure is essential to understanding what options you have available following the loss of an engine or when conducting autorotations during training. We would like to thank Sean Coyle for letting us use Energy and Autorotations chapter of his book, The Little Book of Autorotations.